Good afternoon and welcome to this special edition podcast on women in science and technology, marking the UN's International Day of Women and Girls in Science on February 11th. Women have made groundbreaking contributions to science and technology, often overcoming systemic barriers rooted in gender bias. Despite progress, they remain underrepresented in STEM leadership, face workplace discrimination, and struggle with the leaky pipeline that pushes many out of their careers. Breaking these barriers requires systemic change, equitable policies, inclusive workplaces, and strong female role models could be the way out, some feel. Since 2005, Population First Largely initiative has been challenging gender biases that devalue women and limit their opportunities. This podcast is yet another step in that direction. Today, we are joined by two distinguished experts. Dr. Anandata Bhadra, a behavioral biologist at IISER Kolkata, studies India's free-ranging dogs and their bond with humans. Recipient of multiple awards, including the INSA Young Scientist Award and Amal Janki Amal National Women Bioscientist Award 2021. She co-founded INEAS and co-chaired the Global Young Academy. Passionate about science outreach and policy, she is now Associate Dean of International Relations and Outreach at IISER Kolkata. Outside the lab, she is a dedicated thespian, co-leading the Bangla theatre group Mukhosh with her husband. The other expert we have is Dr. Geeta Chadda, a sociologist and a feminist scholar who has taught for over 3 decades, pioneering feminist science studies at TISS and developing interdisciplinary pedagogy for CSCS and NCBS. Her research explores gender, scientific intuition, and epistemology. She has led feminist archiving initiatives, chaired Mumbai University's Women's Development Cell, and collaborated on feminist art projects. A former Obaid Siddiqui Chair 2023-24 at NCBS, she is now an honorary senior fellow at the NCBS archives. Join us as we dive into their insights on gender, science, and the path toward a more inclusive future. Dr. Bhadra, first over to you. Could you walk us through your early journey that helped develop an interest in science?
Yeah, thanks, Yogesh. So I grew up in a very typical middle-class Bengali family in Kolkata, where education was the major task of young kids. You just had to go to school. You had to do well especially in your science and maths and languages. That was very important in Bengali households. And I went to school, thankfully, where we were asked to do a lot of activities in addition to our regular curriculum. So what we called our extracurricular activities took up much of our time. In fact, I think my initial interest in science goes back to class 3, when our science teacher actually told us to do what she called an experiment. We had no idea what that is. She told us to get, gram seeds and soak them in water and put them on a cotton bed and keep it near a window and see how many of them germinated. And we were really excited to see things sprouting out of those seeds. We had to get them to school and put them next to the window and check every day about the growth. And that was the first experience of doing an experiment. And then she told us, where does this come from? And this is what is going to grow into a plant. And some of those seeds actually sprouted a tiny leaf eventually. And that excitement of it, seeing something happen in front of your eyes because you have done something. And then being explained the reason behind this, that when I look back was the germination of this interest in science in me, which grew over the years because I was very, very, lucky that we had so many teachers who would actually demonstrate things in our classrooms. We were not just asked to mug, we were asked to do projects, go participate in science fairs. In Kolkata, we have the Birla Industrial and Technological Museum. Through our entire middle school, 6, 7, 8 standards, we have been there for their science exhibitions and fairs regularly, where we had to build models, explain those models to people. And I think my interest interest in science started in those early years, and then kind of gradually evolved into what I would like to do as the major field that I would like to spend my life in.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you to familiarize our lay viewers a bit more with your current line of work, the kind of work that you do currently, if you can tell us a little about it.
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So I say that I peep into the private lives of dogs on streets because I am a behavioral biologist, and my students and I we study the behavior, ecology, lifestyle, cognitive abilities of what are typically called stray dogs or streeties or indies. Technically, they are the free ranging dogs. So we try to understand how dogs survive in the human jungle, how well they understand humans, what are their adaptive strategies, how they find food, how they navigate the positive and the negative interactions they receive from humans, what have been their multiple strategies which might have enabled them to become man's best friend. Because, across the world, there are many people studying pet dogs, and they would recruit pets with their owners to come to the labs and do very controlled experiments. So, what we try to do is we try to do similar experiments with completely untrained dogs on the streets in random places, and then we try to understand how much or what we know about dogs from the pet dog literature, which spans back 50, 60 years, is because of their closeness to living with humans, because of being bred by humans through artificial selection, and how much of it is their innate dog capacity. Because that's a very interesting evolutionary question. Also, from a more practical, applied perspective, we have so much dog human conflict on our city streets. And the only way you can really manage this conflict, if you understand the perspective of the dogs and the life of the dogs, to apply this knowledge to better management policies. Because right now we kind of have a blanket approach, and now our studies are showing more and more that that doesn't work, because dogs in different habitats behave differently. They have a very plastic nature, and they adapt to our nature very easily. So to manage them also, we really need to have an understanding of them. So my background training is in animal behavior, and I apply that to understand the lives of dogs in streets.
Absolutely lovely. As a dog lover, I cannot tell you how happy that makes me feel. Over to you, Dr. Chadda. Could you tell us how you got interested in the question of science and gender? What sparked your interest?
Yes, hi, thank you, Yogesh and Anindita. That was such a lovely insight into what you do. And I was thinking of, how as a sociologist, I would look at the question of the stray dog and, the sociology around it, the sociology of dogs. It would be lovely to talk about those things at length. But coming to this, since this is a conversation, also we are aiming at young girls in science and women entering into science. My own journey with science at school actually was interesting because I love doing science. I love the laboratories and things like that. I was not bad at maths either, but I think there was something that was keeping me away from pursuing a career in science. And maybe at best I can say it was an interest in other things. Probably it was an interest in, human life, consciousness, various those kind of things. So I naturally gravitated towards the arts. And slowly, as I moved into my degree, I chose to do the discipline of sociology very, very consciously. I thought that it would give me a more holistic perspective about the relationship about individuals and groups and various other reasons. But as I went along, I recognized that all of social science is based on the scientific method, which in many ways is derived from the physical and natural sciences. Right. So now that piqued my interest into whether what is the relationship, and of course, a lot of reading and a lot of understanding to me, recognizing that while we do use the method of science in the understanding of society, and that's our aspiration, and that's our That was the early dream. We also recognize that there are limitations to using the method of science in understanding extremely complex systems, for which then we need to reimagine the method of science itself. So my entry into sociology of science, or let's say science studies, was through the question of method. And I was more interested in looking at truth making through science, but also say belief in truth making through other modes like religion and art and aesthetics. So it was that which was piquing my interest in science, but particularly in the scientific method. And as I went along, I became a feminist in my personal life. So, and then once you become a feminist, I think, Anindita would probably, you're finished because you bring it into everything. At least I do. So then I had to somewhere get that point of intersection between gender and science, and to try and look at what is it that feminism can offer to more nuanced understanding of science and how it is practiced. And over a period of time in the last 20, 25 years, this exploration has led to very sort of interesting insights into the relationship between science and gender at multiple levels, not just the question of do women get to do science or not, and what are the biases and the stereotypes about both women and science, but to deeper questions also. So that briefly, I don't know whether it sort of answers your question, Yogesh, but that is briefly the trajectory.
Okay. Dr. Chadda, as someone who's engaged in feminist science studies for over 25 years, could you explain what this niche area of study is from the point of view of, please explain this in a lay viewer's point of view, because, they need to understand. So, which is why, if you could explain this a bit,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. Very simply, see, it's about understanding firstly what is feminism, and I personally think that it is a system that of thinking and being that allows us to look at how men and women and others on that spectrum, gender spectrum, get constructed by society, but also about how the allocation of resources and power is skewed across the genders, and how do we explain it historically, sociologically, politically. So, and but the important thing about a feminist understanding of anything is to be able to position it and look at it from the point of view of those who are marginalized. In this case, women. So with that, you start looking at science from the standpoint of, say, women. Hmm? So that is really feminist science studies, and it is interdisciplinary. We bring in insights from philosophy, we bring in insights from history, political science, sociology. Now, the discipline, Yogesh, has sort of moved in four, I would say, central directions. One is to look at the question of uh, who gets to do science. Why is it we don't find enough women in science? Why is it that we don't find enough women at the top, in the sense of as the professional ladder, on the professional ladder? Why is it that we don't find that many women in top positions? Why is it that we don't find women getting the kind of awards that we um, give away, like in whether it's the Nobel Prize, whether it's the Infosys Prize, whether it's the Bhatnagar Award. In the last 10, 15 years, of course, things have changed. But why is it that we don't find this happening? So one of the questions has been for us is to look at the question of women in science. And now we see an increased number of women in science coming in, especially in fields like biology and but the question again for us as feminists becomes you don't see, for example, you see women from again the same upper caste backgrounds. So our question has been how do we bring in people from other marginal groups into science, not just women? People from other caste communities, other religious communities, other ethnic identities, so that a wider number of people get to do science. That has been one major direction in which feminist science studies has gone. But our question has also been about when women make it into science, okay, is their experience not gender? I mean, is it, do they feel like gender doesn't matter then? And we recognize that it does matter. They say that even if we have reached the top, even we have reached significant places, the fact that we are women continues to play a role in how we access science. That's one major contour. And the other two, which I won't get into much, is the question of how does science reproduce theories of the sexual division of labor, for example, theories about the brain, women's ability, women's capability. Why is it that the mainstream narrative continues to think that women's brains do not really allow them to do mathematics? You know, there was this entire controversy with Larry Summers and Tim Hunt. All of that continues to still happen. So what is the role of science in reproducing these theories? That's something that we examine. And lastly, of course, we look at the question of how science gets taught, the pedagogy of science, you know, and is it really reproducing gender biases in the classroom, in the curriculum? How do we work with that? So, this is briefly the kind of contours in which this field called feminist science studies is developing as we go along.
Dr. Chadha, thank you. It seems fairly huge in its magnitude and scope, what you set out to do. But while I understand how important this is, because we have historically seen how women have found their work being appropriated by men who have gone on to even get the Nobel for that. We've seen that happen. We've also seen recently for our Ladli Awards, we saw a journalist who did a story about how women who were part of the Chandrayaan um, initiative, the scientists were asked about the saris they had chosen to wear by journalists. They were not asked about their contribution as scientists, which would have happened in the case of men, but they were asked about their saris. So I can clearly see there are so many intersectionalities and there's so much that this discipline seeks to cover. But coming back to the question about, since we are speaking about this, I'd like you to elaborate a little on India stands vis-a-vis the globe when it comes to women in science.
Maybe Anindita should come in more over
Yes,
here.
I think
Yeah.
Dr. Bhadra, you could also come in and speak about any of these topics. Please feel free to come in as and when you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. So when you look at statistics, unfortunately, we see that we have a very, very leaky pipeline. So if you look at school matriculation level, we have 50-50 girls and boys. And then as we go higher up the academic ladder, the girls just keep vanishing and the percentage of girls keep decreasing. So it is, I think, about 27% girls when it comes to graduation. And then, if you look at faculty positions, the last I had seen it was 14% women in faculty positions across Indian institutions. And then, if you are looking for women who are at the tops of universities and institutions, you can probably count them on your two hands. The number of women who are directors and vice chancellors of organizations, they're just minimal, right? Very, very few. And this is a scenario which is there everywhere in the world, somewhere a little higher, somewhere a little lower. So globally, it's not that women are doing much better. Maybe it's 35% average, we are 27% average, but it's really bad. Only a few countries like Netherlands are good in these statistics. We are not. And my bigger concern is that once you go from the +2 level to the graduation level, why do we have girls who are just dropping out of science education? And then from the BSc to PhD, it is even worse. In fact, there were some statistics a few years back which showed the number of girls who get into a PhD program and the number of girls who actually graduate with a PhD, there is a huge discrepancy, which is where the girls and the women really fall back, because this is also the time of our lives when we are doing our PhDs, postdocs, or in the early career stages as academicians or in industry, wherever you go. This is also the time when women are their most fertile. So this is also their very high period of biological activity if they are interested in starting families. There's a lot of societal pressure. There's also pressure from within that I need to do this, otherwise I'm losing out on time. And somehow the role of raising kids, the responsibility of having a family always falls on the woman. And that is where we actually lose out on a lot of women who have just fallen behind in the race, lost out on promotions, lost out on job opportunities, fellowship opportunities, travel opportunities, because of this very, very critical age when we are struggling between the job responsibilities and the family responsibilities. And this is, I think, something we need to discuss all the time and tell the girls out there that, look at us, we have survived, we have gone through this, we have raised families, and we have done this. It's possible to do it. And we need to tell them how it is possible. We can always look at the problems, but we also need to put forth solutions. And that is where I think it's important to have these discussions where we talk about the solutions and we talk about the possibilities rather than only talk about the negative part of it. So Geeta might
Absolutely.
want to add something to that.
So
Yes.
if I may, if I can take this a little differently also, Anindita, you also see that two things. One is, of course, curiosity. It's also disciplinary differentiation. It's interesting how you see women in one discipline, say like biology, much more and much less in theoretical physics. So there's a gendering of disciplines also that is going on. The more quantitative, the more abstract, we seem to think women are not suited for it, and there is a culture of discouraging them. And so you find very few there, and you find much more gravitating towards certain kind of disciplines. But the other, I was listening to you, Anindita, is, and this is something, Yogesh, which will interest you, is also there. Even when we look in science or the subculture of science itself and scientific institutions, you recognize that there is this entire pressure on all scientists, men and women, to do science to the exclusion of everything else. Science is your life. So for the men, it's easier to do that because there's somebody taking care of everything else at home, right? Food, everything. Whereas for the women, that model doesn't work. Okay, that model itself is not working because of the sexual division of labor in society in general, which will take time to change. And we can keep saying that, men should take part in household work, etc., raising children, all of that. But on the other hand, what we've seen is that from narratives of women who, Anindita, for example, did not get married, who chose not to have children, not to, use their reproductive function, they decided life is about science. Okay, they follow the same model. Despite that, you find that they get discriminated. So, as Yogesh was saying earlier, you have cases like Rosalind Franklin, you have Barbara McClintock, who got the Nobel Prize so late. Even here in India, you see so many examples of women who use that same model. Okay, we will not, get married, we will not have children, we will do science. In the pursuit of science, leave everything away. Why then are they still not treated on par within the scientific community? Is
Yes,
a very,
in
very
fact,
important.
Rohini, we lost her recently. Rohini used to talk about it all the time.
Absolutely. Professor
That there is the
Gogole.
discrimination that we face all the time just because you are a woman.
Yes, hers is a classic example.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Since we're talking about challenges and discrimination, could you go back and think of any time that you have yourself faced this subtly or sometimes not so subtly? If you face this yourself in terms of a challenge or a discriminatory thing, and you had to call it out and call out that person for what he or she was doing? Yes.
Geeta, you want to answer that first?
Anindita, you have handled so many of these questions. I would like also to hear from you. My in the world of science, I'm nobody because I'm a sociologist. So, and a woman. So you are like doubly marginalized. So that leave that
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
But
And on top of that, I do ecology, which is not even considered a science at times.
exactly,
So,
So one
yeah, yeah.
discrimination
So
comes at the level of the discipline
yeah,
itself,
yeah,
And
yeah,
then,
absolutely. You know, ecology is not science.
yeah,
So,
sociology
uh,
to bilkul hi
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, in fact, I first realized that there can be discrimination because you're a woman when I came to this institute and a little later, because, I had not had any such experiences myself. And I always used to think, that, what is this problem that people talk about between supervisors and their students and the stress of PhD, because I had a lovely time doing my PhD with a fantastic supervisor. But then in this institute, I was on a contractual position and I was actually thrown out or tried to be thrown out for various reasons. I was actually told on my face, you're a woman, you have a family, why are you interested in a career in science? Why do you want to be a faculty? Be a scientific officer, you will have a salary, you will have a 9 to 5 job, and you should be happy because you're a woman. I said, look at my CV. Do you think that I don't deserve a regular position? Yeah, yeah, you have a good CV, better CV than many of your colleagues. I agree. But so what? I have heard this on my face, and I have written about this publicly, naming people because I was not afraid. But then that happens. I know of people who've been told to go on trips with their institute, whatever heads, for their positions to be regularized. Kya jayega? Spend some good time with me, come to this conference, we'll have fun. And your position is going to be considered. So things like that happen. And not just at faculty positions. I know that PhD students face harassments from their supervisors. They're even told that you have to keep your boss happy to get a good PhD and to get good recommendations for postdocs. So, yeah, not just discrimination, but harassment happens in this field. And my worry is that most often girls and women don't come out and call it out because they're so scared. And I have often told people that, what are you scared of? The supervisor tells you, I'm not going to give you a good recommendation. How does it matter? Nobody knows you. They tell you, I'm going to ruin your career. You're a PhD student just starting. You'll leave and you'll go off and do a PhD somewhere else. It is that guy's reputation which is going to be hanging on the scales. It is that person's career which is going to be jeopardized. He cannot threaten you. You can threaten him to do the same. But still, I think we are brought up with this culture that girls put up with everything, we accept everything, we don't speak up, we don't speak out. And that is why these things keep happening over and over and over again across institutions. They keep happening.
So, let me also come in here because I know India has taken stances on various things. So, for example, Yogesh, the Me Too movement was very big in the media, right? In the media, it was hugely big. Now, in India, interestingly, the Me Too movement also called out academics. And this was the only place really where the academics, the university research institutes, women called out, men who were predators. It was very unusual because, the academia was generally protected and seen as if, it's a pure place and, it's all merit based and nothing really good happens here. Interestingly, in that, we found that there were no scientists as such named. Okay, social scientists got named, historians, literature people, sociologists, everybody was stories now. But no stories were coming out from science, except maybe in one or two small stories. And when we started looking at this more carefully, we realized that there are many problems. One is, of course, a larger problem that the scientific community is a community made up largely of men. And they tend to protect each other, when there is an IC case. And, even if the judgment is against the male professor or male student for that matter, the entire male community sort of rallies behind them, and there is a very quick rehabilitation. The backlash is to be faced by the female, either young professor or student. Yeah. Their rehabilitation doesn't really happen, despite Anindita saying that we need strength. We also need a collective support of women in science to support women who are going through this kind of harassment. But there's another important thing that came up, and that was that in science, what happens is that suppose if a student works in a laboratory and has to, has continuously been facing harassment, and she wants to call out the person, say in a third or a fourth year of her PhD. What happens, I believe, is that she loses the data that she has been working on for those many years. So if she is put in another lab, then she has to start work from scratch. Okay. Now just imagine, I mean, we put the onus on the girl always, oh, you should strongly call out. But imagine a girl who might have come with a lot of struggle into this, I would call it industry, just as film industry, I'd call it the industry of science. She might have worked a lot to come here. And, we put so much pressure on her to say, you must take the stand, you must take the stance. And I think that somewhere is also unfair, because we need to work on structures. We need to work on structures of redressal rather than putting the onus on the girl again and again. Because if she has to then spend without a scholarship or seek a scholarship again and go back in her career, 4-5 years to start again. So there are some of these things that we need to think collectively about what happens, how knowledge production is organized within scientific institutions. But at least the #MeToo movement, and later on ways the scientific community also, and women within science also came out, at least showed us that the scientific community or scientific institutions are not as free from, the problem of sexual harassment. Surely not. It's not just a problem that happens in the media or in the art. It happens very much in
exactly.
So that
In
was.
fact, I'll give you a positive story to end this particular point, I think. So, Aiza Kolkata had a very, very, deep-rooted problem with a particular faculty member, and there the girl was brave enough to come out and complain. And there was, ICC was happening, etc. We actually had a change of leadership at that time, so things were hanging. And eventually, students went on a strike saying, "We want a resolution. We want this to be taken care of." And the good thing about it was, when the girl complained, the entire lab stood by her, and they said, "We are not going to work for this lab until this is resolved, because this is true. We back her." And the entire student community, many of us faculty members, stood by them. And when the new director joined, this was the first thing he took up. Professor Shorapal at that time joined, and the students went and met him. And eventually, we actually threw that guy out. And I'm very proud of it, that the institute took a stand and told him that he has to leave. So he had actually fled the country already, but he was, made to resign, not given permission to come back and wrap up his work. He was said that he cannot enter the campus at all. And in addition to that, we set up a committee in our department and actually found a supervisor for the student where she could work on the rest of her PhD, who would, the institute told the faculty that it was her data and she should be allowed to take it, because he said, "It's my data." And we said, "No, it's her data. She has produced it, so she should be allowed to be an author on the paper." And then she was actually given extensive 2 years fellowship by the institute, so that she would be able to complete her work and, did not also have the stress of being without a fellowship for 2 extra years. So the institute actually facilitated the whole thing, and she eventually got her PhD, and now she's settled with a postdoc, etc. So that is where you need the institution to be more positive and and proactive and people to take this up, so that the girl doesn't have to face all the stress, and then the onus of having complained as if it is all her fault to get through this additional stress, or what does she do with her life.
Mm.
Right. So, actually, when you spoke about it, it actually is very reassuring to see that an institution is backing a girl who makes this kind of complaint. But that is not largely the norm, isn't it? That's more the exception than the rule, if one goes by how things play out, particularly in India. So,
Yes.
given how both of you have responded to the last two questions, it seems scarily harrowing and horrific to see how this plays out. So, I would like to, we are also coming towards the end of the kind of time we have for the podcast. So, in the end, I would like both of you to respond to this question. Take turns to you can come in as you want. On what advice then you would have for young girls and women who want to pursue science as a career? What would you have to tell them? Or maybe what would you tell yourself if you met yourself now as a young 20-year-old or a 18-year-old? What would you tell yourself maybe?
Go for it, Anindita.
Okay, so in spite of all the nasty things that are happening out there in the world, we have dreams, we survive, we live our lives, right? So the scientific community, academic community is not outside of a society, it's part of the society. So the different negative things can happen to you on the street, can also happen in life, in your career, in whichever way you go. So we have to learn how to handle these situations, and mature ourselves to handle these situations if we have to face it. If not, fantastic. But if you are a young person interested in science, my advice would be, if you have a dream, follow it and live your dream. Don't just think that, okay, maybe it's very scary, maybe it's too difficult. Don't listen to anyone's advice. Listen to your heart and follow your dream. That would be my advice to all girls out there.
Yes, Dr. Chadda, what do you want to say?
So, this is a question we get asked very often, and it is something that we have to think through. Uh, our problem is we are told that if you are, which we are, critical of the entire project of science, the way it is so tied up with capitalism, the way it is so deeply violent against nature, it's sort of the kind of science we do is so problematic, then which we would like reimagined, then why would we want girls to come in, or why do we want women to come in if it is such a bad project? If we are asked this question, people who critique science. And my answer is very simple. Firstly, because it is the girls want to come in. Okay. They like science. Okay. They are capable of doing science. So their right to doing science is what we need to protect by bringing in more and more girls in science who want to, and make the culture and institutional culture of science safe enough for these girls and women to do well. Okay, do it full-heartedly and to their full satisfaction. But I also think there's another reason why women and girls should, however difficult it is, like Anindita said, life is on. I mean, we live in a patriarchal universe, right? So we face this everywhere. So this should not therefore be a deterrent for you to come here, because let's demystify science and say it's as much a part of science or society. So if they come in, I think it's important, I would think, that for them to also come in with a critical idea about science, that science is not just doing science. It could be doing science journalism, it could be doing science communication, it could be doing science education. They don't have to all become professional scientists. There are many other ways of doing science. So we should come with that wide-based perspective into science, and also come with an understanding that I need to look at science from a perspective which is questioning, challenging. So what is it in biology, in evolutionary biology or developmental biology or neurobiology? What is it that might be reproducing certain gender biases? How do I look at it as a woman, as a girl? How do I correct it? So somewhere I think they are the only ones who bring in that critical perspective also. So I think my message would be go for it, you know, and go for it and go there and shake it up.
Absolutely. It's great to hear both of you. We could talk about this subject all day and probably all night too, but we are running
Yes.
out of time. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you and remind all the viewers who are joining us that time and again there have been attempts at trying to bring in the protection narrative, but like both these academics have pointed out to us, it should be about safety and more than protection. So it should always be about safety, and that is what we need to change that narrative when it comes to women and the kind of unwelcome attention or the sexual harassment that they face. I want to thank both of you for making time of your extremely busy schedules to do this for us and talk to all of us and uh, thrash out so many of these issues which have become so much more clearer to many of us. Thank you very much. I want to thank the viewers for joining us for being watching this podcast. I would like you to offer your feedback and your comments to this podcast and tell us what you feel about some of the views expressed here. We look forward to hearing from you also so that you become fellow travelers on this path to gender equality. Thank you very much, one and all.
Thank you, Yogesh.
Thank you.